Rain hammered against the wooden wagon as Hope, Mercer struggled to control her panicked horses, the canyon walls rising like dark sentinels on either side of the narrow trail. A deafening crack split the air as her rear axle finally gave way, the wagon listing dangerously to one side. Clutching the reins with white knuckles, she fought against the inevitable, but it was too late. The wagon lurched, sending her precious belongings tumbling into the churning mud below. As thunder rolled across the Idaho sky, Hope caught sight of a figure on horseback emerging from the curtain of rain. The stranger dismounted with practiced ease, his silhouette tall against the stormy backdrop as he approached her broken wagon. "Madam," he called over the downpour, pushing his dripping hat back to reveal eyes as blue as a summer sky. "Looks like you've got yourself in quite a fix." Idaho Territory, 1869. Hope Mercer had left Boston with dreams that stretched as wide as the western horizon. At 23, she had abandoned the stifling expectations of her family to answer an advertisement for schoolteachers in the Idaho Territory. The journey west had depleted nearly all her savings, but the promise of independence of a life lived on her own terms had propelled her forward, despite her parents' vocal disapproval. For 3 weeks, she traveled alongside a wagon train bound for Idaho City, a former gold rush town that had settled into a more respectable existence. When the wagon master announced they were just 2 days from their destination, Hope had made a fateful decision. Rather than camp with the others, she'd pushed ahead, eager to arrive and establish herself before the new term began. "The canyon route will save you half a day," the wagon master had told her with a doubtful glance at the gathering clouds. "But I wouldn't risk it with the weather turning. Best stick with us." Hope had smiled confidently, assuring him she'd be fine. She wasn't some delicate eastern flower, she'd insisted. But now, as rain transformed the canyon trail into a river of mud, her confidence had washed away as surely as the path beneath her wheels. The stranger approached cautiously, leading a magnificent chestnut stallion whose coat gleamed despite the rain. He wore a well-worn leather duster, jeans caked with mud, and boots that had clearly traveled countless miles. "Thomas Galloway," he said by way of introduction, touching the brim of his hat. "Most folks call me Trace." "Hope Mercer," she replied, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I was bound for Idaho City." Trace circled her wagon, assessing the damage with practiced eyes. "Axles split clean through, no fixing that out here." He glanced up at the darkening sky. "Storm's getting worse. Canyon floods something terrible when it rains like this." Hope's heart sank. "What am I to do? I'm expected in Idaho City by tomorrow. I'm to be their new schoolteacher." A flash of recognition crossed his face. "You're the Boston teacher. Town's been waiting on you." He looked back at the broken wagon, then up at the narrow trail ahead. "Well, Miss Mercer, looks like you've got 2 choices. Wait here for the storm to pass and hope the canyon doesn't flood, or—" He paused, his eyes meeting hers with an unexpected gentleness. "You can salvage what you can carry and ride with me. You'll reach the end with me beside you." Hope hesitated. Her mother's warnings about strange men echoed in her mind, but there was something in Trace Galloway's steady gaze that inspired trust rather than fear. And with night falling and the rain intensifying, her options were dwindling rapidly. "How do I know I can trust you, Mr. Galloway?" she asked, clutching her soaked shawl tighter around her shoulders. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Fair question. I run the Silver Spoon Ranch about 10 miles outside town. Sheriff Reynolds would vouch for me, as would Reverend Miller. But neither of them is here right now, so you'll have to decide for yourself." He extended his hand toward her. "I give you my word as a gentleman that you'll reach Idaho City safely." Hope studied him for a long moment. There was something in his weathered face, a quiet integrity that resonated with her. With a deep breath, she placed her hand in his, allowing him to help her down from the wagon seat. "We need to move quickly," Trace said, releasing her hand. "Grab only what's essential: clothes, valuables. My horse can't carry everything." Hope worked frantically, salvaging what she could from the listing wagon. Her trunk of books essential for teaching was too heavy, but she managed to save her personal journal, a change of clothes, and the letters of introduction that would establish her position in Idaho City. Most precious was the small wooden box containing her mother's cameo and the modest savings that remained after her journey. As she worked, Trace secured what they could to his saddle, rigging a makeshift cover to protect her belongings from the rain. He worked with efficient movements, pausing only to soothe his horse when thunder crashed directly overhead. "That's all we can manage," he said finally, surveying their hasty packing. "The canyon's already starting to fill. We need to move." Hope cast one last glance at her wagon, the vehicle that had carried her across a continent toward a new life. Now it sat broken, half buried in mud, containing the remnants of her former existence. "I'm sorry about your things," Trace said, seeming to understand the weight of what she was losing. "But possessions can be replaced. You can't." He helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her. The proximity was jarring. She'd never been this close to a man who wasn't family, but as he guided the horse forward into the storm, she found herself grateful for his solid presence at her back. They rode in silence for a time, the rain pelting them relentlessly as the horse picked its way carefully along the narrowing trail. The canyon walls loomed closer on either side, and Hope could hear the ominous sound of rushing water growing louder. "The water's rising faster than I expected," Trace said, his breath warm against her ear. "We need to get to higher ground." He directed his horse up a steep side path, barely visible in the fading light. The animal climbed valiantly, hooves scrambling for purchase on the slick rock. Hope clung to the saddle horn, her heart pounding as they ascended. When they finally reached a small plateau, Trace reined in. "We'll wait here until daybreak. The trail ahead is too dangerous to navigate in the dark." He helped her dismount, her legs trembling from the strain of the ride. In the shelter of an overhanging rock, he quickly built a small fire using dry kindling from his saddlebags. "You're well prepared," Hope observed as warmth began to emanate from the flames. Trace shrugged, removing his duster and draping it around her shoulders. "Out here, being unprepared means being dead. I don't leave my ranch without the means to survive a night in the open." The duster enveloped her in unexpected warmth and carried his scent: leather, tobacco, and something indefinably masculine. "Thank you," she said, pulling it closer. "For all of this." He nodded, busying himself with unsaddling his horse. "You should try to dry off as best you can. I'll turn my back." True to his word, Trace gave her privacy to change into the dry clothes she'd saved from her wagon. The simple cotton dress was rumpled but blessedly dry. She used her damp garments to towel her hair as best she could, then wrapped herself again in Trace's duster. "You can turn around now," she called over the persistent drumming of rain. He returned to the fire, adding more wood from his seemingly endless supply. In the flickering light, Hope studied him properly for the first time. He was older than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or 31, with lines etched at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long days under the western sun. His hair was the color of coffee, curling slightly where it met his collar, and despite his rugged appearance, there was a refinement to his features that suggested education. "Have you been in Idaho Territory long, Mr. Galloway?" she asked, trying to distract herself from the howling wind. Going on 8 years, he replied, settling across the fire from her. Came west after the war, needed open space and clean air after what I saw. You fought in the war between the states, he nodded, his expression closing slightly. Union Army, Pennsylvania 83rd Infantry. Hope hesitated, sensing his reluctance to discuss it further. And your ranch, the Silver Spoon, was it? How did you come by that name? A genuine smile softened his features. Wasn't my choosing. Previous owner was a Southern gentleman who claimed he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Name stuck, even after I bought the place. You run cattle, some horses. We're small compared to the big outfits, but we turn a profit. He paused, studying her with curious eyes. What brings a Boston lady all the way to Idaho City to teach school? Most Eastern women I've met wouldn't consider it. Hope stared into the flames, considering her answer. I wanted more than what was expected of me in Boston. My parents had my life planned out, a suitable marriage, a house not far from their own, children raised exactly as I was. She shook her head. I wanted to see something of the world before settling into that life, to feel I've done something meaningful. And teaching children in a mining town seemed meaningful. Children deserve education, no matter where they live, she replied with conviction. And yes, I believe teaching is among the most meaningful work one can do. Trace nodded slowly. Fair enough. Idaho City's lucky to have someone who thinks that way. Last teacher lasted 3 months before deciding our children were too rough for her delicate sensibilities. Hope straightened her shoulders. I assure you, Mr. Galloway, I'm made of sterner stuff than that. His eyes crinkled with amusement. I'm starting to see that, Miss Mercer. They lapsed into comfortable silence, the crackling fire and drumming rain creating a strange cocoon of intimacy in the vast wilderness. Hope found herself studying Trace when he wasn't looking, the capable hands that tended the fire, the quiet alertness with which he monitored their surroundings, the gentle way he'd checked on his horse before settling for the night. Try to get some sleep, he suggested, spreading a small tarp near the fire. I'll keep watch. Aren't you going to rest? I'll wake you in a few hours to take your turn watching, he said, though something in his tone suggested he had no intention of doing so. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. The ground was hard, the sounds of the storm unsettling, and her mind whirled with worries about her wagon, her missing possessions, and her imminent arrival in Idaho City. What would the townspeople think when she arrived on horseback with a stranger? Her carefully planned entrance in shambles. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were a jumble of rushing water, breaking wood, and blue eyes watching her from the shadows. Hope awoke to silence. The rain had stopped, and pale light filtered through the dissipating clouds. She sat up, momentarily disoriented, before remembering the events of the previous day. Trace was nowhere to be seen, but his horse remained, now contentedly grazing on sparse vegetation. His saddlebags and her salvaged belongings were still beside the cold fire. "Mr. Galloway," she called, a hint of panic rising in her chest. "Over here," came his reply from beyond a cluster of rocks. She followed his voice to find him standing at the edge of the plateau, surveying the canyon below. Dawn light illuminated the devastating aftermath of the storm. What had been a dry canyon floor with a modest stream was now a raging river, carrying debris including what appeared to be pieces of her wagon in its churning current. "My wagon," she whispered, coming to stand beside him. "Gone," he confirmed grimly. "We got out just in time." Canyons flooded worse than I've seen in years. The reality of her situation struck Hope fully for the first time. Had she ignored the wagon master's warning and continued alone, she would have been swept away with her belongings. The thought sent a chill down her spine despite the warming air. "You saved my life," she said quietly. Trace turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You might have found higher ground on your own. We both know that's unlikely." She met his gaze steadily. "Thank you, Mr. Galloway." A faint flush colored his tanned cheeks. "Trace, if we're going to be traveling together, you might as well use my name." "Trace," she repeated, the informality strange on her tongue. "And you may call me Hope." He nodded, turning back to study the flooded canyon. "Main trail's impassable. We'll need to take the high route to Idaho City." "It's longer but safer." "How much longer?" Hope asked, thinking of her appointment with the town council. "We'll arrive by nightfall, God willing." He glanced at the brightening sky. "Weather's clearing, which is in our favor. We should move while we can." They broke camp efficiently, Hope folding the tarp while Trace saddled his horse. As she worked, she noticed him wincing slightly when he raised his left arm. "Are you injured?" she asked. He shook his head dismissively. "Old war wound acts up in damp weather, nothing to concern yourself with." His tone discouraged further questions, but Hope filed the information away. This man was becoming less of a stranger with each passing hour, and she found herself increasingly curious about the life that had shaped him. The journey along the high trail proved arduous but breathtaking. The path clung to the canyon rim, offering spectacular views of the wilderness below. Riding double slowed their progress, but Trace's stallion, whom he called Samson, carried them steadily forward with remarkable endurance. As they rode, conversation flowed more easily between them. Hope shared stories of her journey west, of the characters she'd met on the Wagon train, and of her determination to prove herself in Idaho City. In turn, Trace told her about the challenges and rewards of ranching in the territory, the harsh winters, the satisfaction of building something with his own hands, the community that had gradually accepted the eastern greenhorn as one of their own. "It wasn't easy at first," he admitted as they stopped to rest the horse near midday. "Locals figured I'd run home to Pennsylvania at the first sign of trouble. Took surviving 2 winters and a Shoshone raid before they decided I might be staying." "A raid?" Hope echoed, her eyes widening. "Relations with the Shoshone are better now," he assured her. "The Fort Hall reservations brought some stability, though I can't blame them for resisting. This was their land long before we arrived." Hope appreciated his candor about the complicated situation with the native peoples, a perspective rarely expressed in the Eastern newspapers she'd read. "Is there still danger?" "Not like before. Chief Tendoy's band is peaceful. Most trouble comes from renegades who refuse reservation life, but they generally avoid settled areas now." He handed her a strip of jerky from his saddlebag. "Your school will have Shoshone children alongside the miners' kids. Reservations not far from town." This was news to Hope. Her correspondence with the town council hadn't mentioned native students. "I've never taught indigenous children," she admitted. "I know nothing of their language or customs." "You'll learn," Trace said simply, as if her success were a foregone conclusion. "Most speak some English." "The agent at Fort Hall's been pushing education hard." He studied her thoughtfully. "You're not reconsidering, are you?" "No," Hope said firmly. "I'm just realizing how much I have to learn. All children deserve education, as I said before. I simply want to teach them well." Satisfaction flickered in his eyes. "That attitude will serve you better than book learning out here." As they continued their journey, the terrain gradually changed. The stark canyon gave way to rolling hills dotted with ponderosa pines. By late afternoon, they caught sight of smoke rising in the distance, the first sign of Idaho City. "We're close now," Trace said, pointing toward the smoke. "Town sits in a valley just beyond that ridge." Hope felt a flutter of nerves. I must look a fright, she murmured, suddenly conscious of her rumpled dress and wind-tangled hair. Trace glanced back at her, a hint of amusement in his eyes. You look like a woman who survived a canyon flood. Wear it proudly. His words bolstered her confidence. Yes, she had survived, thanks to his help. She would arrive in Idaho City with her head held high, regardless of her appearance. The sun was beginning its descent when they crested the final ridge. Below them lay Idaho City, a surprisingly substantial settlement nestled in a valley carved by Moore's Creek. The town had clearly expanded beyond its mining camp origins, with proper streets, substantial buildings, and even a church steeple rising above the clustered structures. It's larger than I expected, Hope remarked, studying what would be her new home. Gold brought people. Commerce kept some of them, Trace explained. Not as wild as it was in the rush days, but still rough around the edges. As they rode down into the valley, Hope became increasingly aware of the spectacle they would create, the new schoolteacher arriving on horseback with the owner of the Silver Spoon Ranch. She straightened her back and smoothed her hair as best she could. Where should I present myself first? The mayor, the school board, sheriff's office, Trace answered. Reynolds will know where the council members are, and he can spread word of your arrival. He paused. And explain about your wagon. People here understand the dangers of canyon travel. They won't think less of you for what happened. Their entrance into town drew exactly the attention Hope had anticipated. Children paused in their play to stare. Women stepped onto porches for a better look, and men nodded respectfully to Trace while eyeing Hope with undisguised curiosity. Trace guided Samson down the main street, acknowledging greetings with quiet dignity. He seemed neither embarrassed by the attention nor eager to elaborate on the circumstances of their arrival, for which Hope was grateful. The sheriff's office occupied a solid brick building near the town center. As they dismounted, a tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest emerged, his weathered face breaking into a grin at the sight of Trace. Galloway, didn't expect to see you in town until the cattle auction. His gaze shifted to Hope, curiosity evident in his eyes. Sheriff Reynolds, Trace said, extending his hand. This is Miss Hope Mercer, Idaho City's new schoolteacher. Had the misfortune of trying to navigate Timber Canyon during yesterday's downpour. Her wagon's at the bottom of the flood by now. Sheriff Reynolds removed his hat. Miss Mercer, welcome to Idaho City. We've been looking forward to your arrival. His expression grew concerned. Timber Canyon, you say? Your fortunate Trace found you. We've lost good people in those flash floods. Hope shook the sheriff's hand. Mr. Galloway's assistance was indeed providential. I owe him my life. The sheriff nodded knowingly. Trace has a habit of being in the right place at the right time. He gestured toward the building across the street. That's the Iron Horse Hotel, Mrs. Patterson's been keeping a room ready for you this past week. I'll let the council know you've arrived, though I expect news of your coming is already spreading faster than a prairie fire. Thank you, Sheriff, Hope said, relieved to have accommodations waiting. I'm eager to meet the council and begin preparations for the school term. They'll be falling over themselves to welcome you, especially after hearing about your ordeal. He turned to Trace. You staying in town tonight? Trace shook his head. Need to get back to the ranch. Jenkins has been handling things, but we've got calving season approaching. Hope felt a surprising pang of disappointment at his imminent departure. This man, who had been a stranger yesterday, had become something else entirely, not quite a friend, but someone whose presence she had come to rely on. At least let me buy you a meal before you go, she said impulsively. It seems a poor repayment for saving my life, but it's all I can offer at present. Trace hesitated, glancing at the setting sun. I should be getting back. Even Samson needs rest after the day he's had, Hope pressed, nodding toward the tired horse. And I imagine you could use a hot meal as much as I could. Sheriff Reynolds chuckled. She's got you there, Galloway. Besides, Julia's serving her venison stew at the hotel tonight. Best meal in 3 counties. After a moment's consideration, Trace nodded. 1 meal. Then I'll head back. Hope couldn't explain the relief she felt at his acceptance. Perhaps it was simply the comfort of having one familiar face in this strange new place. Or perhaps it was something more, a connection formed through shared danger that she wasn't yet ready to relinquish. The Iron Horse Hotel proved to be a surprisingly elegant establishment for a frontier town. The lobby boasted polished wooden floors, a grand staircase, and actual paintings on the walls, evidence of Idaho City's prosperity compared to the rougher mining settlements Hope had passed on her journey. Mrs. Patterson, the hotel proprietress, greeted Hope with genuine warmth, expressing horror at her ordeal and gratitude to Trace for his rescue. She was a stout woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Galloway rarely graces us with his presence," she remarked, leading them toward the dining room. "You must be special indeed, Miss Mercer, to lure him into town." Hope felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He's been extraordinarily kind in my hour of need. I'm sure he'd have done the same for anyone in my situation." "Perhaps," Mrs. Patterson said, her tone suggesting she believed otherwise. "Your room is ready whenever you wish to retire, but I imagine a hot meal is your priority at present." The dining room was half full, primarily with businessmen and what appeared to be mining company officials. Their arrival caused a momentary lull in conversation before the buzz resumed, now undoubtedly centered on the newcomers. "Word travels fast here," Trace murmured as they were seated at a corner table. "By morning, every soul in Idaho City will know how you arrived." "Will that cause problems for me?" Hope asked, suddenly concerned about her reputation. "In Boston, arriving in such a manner with a man I've just met would be considered scandalous." A faint smile touched his lips. "Idaho City isn't Boston, thankfully. Folks here judge by actions, not appearances. You survived a canyon flood and still made it to fulfill your commitment to the school. They'll respect that." Their meal arrived promptly, venison stew accompanied by fresh bread, and to Hope's delight, real coffee. As they ate, Trace answered her questions about the town and its inhabitants, providing insights that would serve her well in the coming days. "The school board is headed by Jeremiah Miller. He's both reverend and chairman," Trace explained. "Fair man, though strict about moral conduct. His wife Abigail is likely to take you under her wing. They lost their daughter to typhoid a few years back, about your age. She would have been." Hope absorbed this information, grateful for the preparation. "And the children, what can I expect?" Mixture of backgrounds. Miners' kids, merchants' families, some ranchers' children who board in town during the school term. About 30 students total, ages 6 to 16. He hesitated. "As I mentioned, there are Shoshone children too, mostly from families that work with the white settlement rather than living on the reservation." "How are they treated by the other children?" Trace considered this. "Better than in some places, worse than they should be. The previous teacher didn't handle it well, favored the white children openly, caused resentment all around." Hope frowned. "That won't happen in my classroom. Every child deserves equal opportunity to learn." "I believe you mean that," Trace said, studying her with those perceptive blue eyes. "But meaning it and making it happen are different challenges. You'll face opposition from parents, from town leaders, even from children who have been taught certain prejudices." "Then I'll face it," Hope replied firmly. "I didn't come all this way to perpetuate ignorance." A genuine smile transformed his features. "Idaho City doesn't know what it's in for with you, Hope Mercer." As they finished their meal, more townspeople found reasons to pass by their table, each stopping to welcome Hope and exchange words with Trace. She noted the respect with which they addressed him, not the forced deference often shown to wealthy Easterners, but genuine regard for a man who had earned his place in the community. When the meal concluded, Trace rose reluctantly. "I should get back to the ranch while there's still some light." Hope stood as well, suddenly aware that this might be the last time she saw him. "Of course. You've already delayed your return on my account far too long." They walked together to the hotel entrance, where Sampson waited patiently, now rested and fed. An uncomfortable silence fell between them, neither quite knowing how to conclude this unexpected alliance. "I don't know how to thank you properly," Hope finally said, meeting his eyes. "You risked your own safety for a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," Trace replied quietly. The simple statement carried a weight that caught Hope by surprise. In the span of a day, this man had indeed become something other than a stranger, someone whose presence she would miss more than seemed reasonable. "Will I see you again?" she asked, then immediately flushed at her boldness. "Idaho City school board meetings are held at the church on the first Monday of each month," he said, adjusting Sampson's saddle. "I represent the outlying ranches." Hope's spirits lifted. "Then I'll see you at the meeting next week." He nodded, mounting his horse with fluid grace despite his evident fatigue. "Until then, Miss Mercer, I wish you success with your new position." "Thank you, Mr. Galloway, for everything." She watched as he rode away, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun. Only when he had disappeared from view did she realize she was still wearing his leather duster, wrapped protectively around her shoulders. The first days in Idaho City passed in a whirlwind of introductions, orientations, and preparations for the school term. Hope was welcomed warmly by the town council, who expressed both sympathy for her ordeal and admiration for her perseverance in reaching Idaho City, despite the setback. As Trace had predicted, Reverend Miller's wife Abigail took Hope under her wing, guiding her through the social complexities of frontier society and helping her acquire necessities to replace those lost with her wagon. The school itself was a simple but solid structure with one large room, rows of wooden desks, a pot-bellied stove for heating, and a modest collection of books. "Previous teacher left most of her materials," Abigail explained as they inventoried the school's resources. "But I fear they're woefully inadequate, especially for the older students." Hope examined the worn readers and outdated geography texts with a critical eye. "I'll make do for now, but I'd like to request additional books when funds permit. And perhaps maps. The ones here show territories that have been states for years." "The council has allocated a small budget for supplies," Abigail assured her. "Jeremiah will help you submit a proper request." Throughout these preparations, Hope found her thoughts repeatedly straying to Trace Galloway. She'd hung his duster in her room, intending to return it at the school board meeting, but often found herself running her fingers over the worn leather, remembering the security of his presence during their journey through the canyon. The Monday of the school board meeting arrived with Hope feeling both nervous and eager. She dressed with particular care in one of the new dresses she'd purchased, a practical but becoming navy blue with white collar and cuffs, and pinned her hair in a style that was neat without being severe. The meeting was held in the church's side room, with 6 board members seated around a large table. Hope's heart sank when she realized Trace was not among them. Reverend Miller called the meeting to order, introducing Hope formally to the other members, a process interrupted when the door opened and Trace entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. "Apologies for my tardiness," he said, taking the empty seat. Creeks running high after the rains had to detour to the north crossing. Hope fought to keep her expression neutral, though her pulse had quickened embarrassingly at his arrival. He looked different in town clothes, a clean shirt, vest, and string tie replacing the practical work attire she'd seen him in before. His hair was neatly combed, though a rebellious strand still curled at his collar. He met her eyes briefly, offering a small nod of acknowledgement before turning his attention to Reverend Miller. The meeting proceeded with discussions of the upcoming term, student enrollment, and Hope's requests for additional materials. She presented her plans articulately, impressing the board with her organization and foresight. Throughout the discussion, she was acutely aware of Trace's quiet presence, his interventions infrequent but insightful. When the topic of the Shoshone students arose, tension became evident among the board members. Previous arrangement has been to seat them separately. One member, a successful merchant named Wilkinson, stated firmly. "Keeps disruption to a minimum." Hope straightened in her chair. "I intend to seat children according to age and ability, not background," she said clearly. "Segregation serves no educational purpose and actively hinders learning for all students." Wilkinson frowned. "Miss Mercer, with all due respect, you're new to our territory. These arrangements reflect years of experience with the realities of frontier education." "The realities of prejudice, you mean?" Trace interjected quietly. All heads turned toward him, surprised by his direct challenge. "The Shoshone children who attend our school are from families who have chosen cooperation over conflict. Treating them as lesser doesn't serve anyone's interests, not theirs, not the white children's, and certainly not Idaho City's future." Hope stared at him, taken aback by his forthright support. Reverend Miller cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. "Perhaps we should allow Miss Mercer to implement her approach initially," he suggested diplomatically. "If problems arise, we can revisit the matter at our next meeting." The compromise was accepted reluctantly, and the meeting continued. When it concluded an hour later, Hope gathered her papers, conscious of Trace waiting near the door as the other board members filed out. "Thank you for your support regarding the Shoshone students," she said when they were finally alone. He shrugged, though his eyes held a glint of approval. "You were right. I just backed the correct position." "Nevertheless, I appreciate it." She hesitated. "I have your duster at the hotel. Would you like to retrieve it now, if it's convenient?" They walked together toward the Iron Horse Hotel, their pace unhurried in the pleasant evening air. Idaho City was settling into its nighttime routine, saloons coming to life with music and voices, families retreating to their homes, businesses closing for the day. "The school looks well prepared," Trace remarked. "You've accomplished much in a short time." Mrs. Miller has been invaluable, Hope acknowledged. "Though I wish I hadn't lost my personal library in the canyon. There were texts there that would benefit the older students particularly." "What sort of texts?" "Literature primarily. Dickens, Hawthorne, Melville, authors who expand minds beyond the territory's boundaries." She sighed. "The readers provided by the school board are functional but uninspiring." Trace nodded thoughtfully but made no comment. When they reached the hotel, Hope invited him to wait in the lobby while she retrieved his duster from her room. Upon returning, she found him examining a painting of the Idaho wilderness with critical eyes. "Not quite right," he murmured as she approached. "Artist has never seen these mountains in winter." "You have an artist's eye," Hope observed, handing him the folded duster, just a rancher's knowledge of the land. He accepted the garment, their fingers brushing momentarily. Thank you for taking care of it." "It's I who should thank you," Hope replied. "It kept me warm when I needed it most." An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with things unsaid. Hope found herself wishing he would stay longer, perhaps share another meal, continue their conversation. But he was already moving toward the door. "School begins next Monday?" he asked, pausing at the threshold. Hope nodded. 8 o'clock sharp. 28 students enrolled thus far. "You'll do well," he said with quiet confidence. "They're lucky to have you." Before she could respond, he touched his hat in farewell and was gone, leaving Hope with a strange emptiness she couldn't quite explain. The first day of school arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures, a perfect beginning, Hope thought as she arranged her desk for the 20th time that morning. She had arrived an hour early to ensure everything was in order. Slates cleaned, readers distributed appropriately, her lesson plans neatly written in her new journal. At precisely 8 o'clock, she rang the bell that stood outside the schoolhouse door. Children came running from various directions, some accompanied by parents, others in groups of siblings or friends. They filed into the classroom with expressions ranging from excitement to trepidation to outright suspicion. Hope surveyed her new charges as they found seats. Most were dressed simply but neatly, though a few wore clothes that had clearly seen better days. In the back row, 3 children sat apart from the others, 2 boys and a girl with distinctive Shoshone features, their expressions carefully neutral. "Good morning," Hope said warmly. "I am Miss Mercer, your new teacher. Before we begin our lessons, I'd like to learn all your names." She moved through the classroom, asking each child to stand and introduce themselves. When she reached the Shoshone students, she noticed the tension that rippled through the room. "Your names, please," she asked, her tone unchanged from how she'd addressed the other students. The oldest boy, perhaps 14, stood stiffly. "Joseph," he said, his English clear but accented. "This is my brother Daniel and my sister Sarah." "Thank you, Joseph. I'm pleased to have you in our class." Hope addressed the entire room. "In this school, we learn together. Each of you brings valuable perspectives and abilities. I expect everyone to treat their fellow students with respect, regardless of background." She noted the skeptical glances exchanged among some of the older white students, but proceeded with her planned lessons nonetheless. The morning passed quickly as Hope assessed her students' varied educational levels and began organizing appropriate groupings. By midday dismissal, she had a clearer picture of the challenges ahead, particularly the wide disparity in reading abilities and the social divisions that would need addressing. Still, she felt optimistic as she watched the children scatter for their lunch break. She was arranging afternoon materials when a knock at the open door drew her attention. Trace Galloway stood in the doorway, holding a wooden crate. "Mr. Galloway," she said, unable to hide her surprise. "What brings you to town on a Monday?" "Delivery," he replied, entering and placing the crate on her desk. "Open it when you have a moment." Curious, Hope lifted the lid to reveal several books, not new, but well-preserved volumes of exactly the authors she had mentioned losing. Dickens, Hawthorne, Melville, along with Shakespeare, Austen, and collections of poetry. "How did you?" she began, lifting a leather-bound copy of Great Expectations with reverent hands. "Had these at the ranch," Trace explained, seeming almost embarrassed by her evident delight. "They've been gathering dust since I came west. Thought they might be of more use here." Hope was momentarily speechless. The books represented not just educational resources, but a personal treasure, a glimpse into the man Trace had been before Idaho Territory. An educated man, clearly, with literary tastes that surprised her. "This is extraordinarily generous," she finally managed. "Are you certain you wish to part with them? They should be read, not stored," he said simply. "Besides, I've memorized most of the good parts." Hope laughed, running her fingers along the embossed spine of Moby Dick. "Which parts do you consider good?" "I know not all that may be coming, but be it what it will, I'll go to it laughing," he quoted, his expression softening into something she hadn't seen before. "Seemed fitting when I headed west." The fluent quotation confirmed Hope's suspicion that Trace Galloway was far more than the frontier rancher he appeared to be. Before she could inquire further, however, the school bell rang, signaling the end of the lunch break. "I should go," Trace said, backing toward the door as children began streaming into the building. "Just wanted to deliver those before the weather turns again." "Thank you," Hope called after him. "Truly." He acknowledged her gratitude with a nod, then disappeared, leaving Hope to ponder this new dimension of the man who had saved her in the canyon. The weeks that followed established a rhythm to Hope's new life in Idaho City. Her days were filled with teaching, her evenings with lesson preparation and grading. Sundays brought church services where she sat with the Millers, gradually integrating into the community's social fabric. The school itself presented both rewards and challenges. Most students responded well to Hope's teaching methods, though resistance to her integrated classroom continued among certain families. Joseph, the eldest Shoshone student, proved to be exceptionally bright, particularly in mathematics. His siblings were quieter but equally dedicated to their studies. Hope saw little of Trace during this period. He appeared at the monthly school board meeting, contributing thoughtfully to discussions, but departing immediately afterward with only a brief acknowledgement of her presence. She found herself unreasonably disappointed by these limited interactions, though she chided herself for such feelings. Their connection had been circumstantial, a dramatic rescue, a journey shared. There was no reason to expect more. Yet the books he'd given her remained a tangible reminder of something deeper. She used them regularly with her advanced students, sometimes opening to passages that contained penciled notes in a precise hand that she knew must be his. These marginalia fascinated her. Brief observations, questions, occasional arguments with the authors that revealed an incisive mind. As October painted the surrounding hills with autumn colors, Idaho City prepared for its annual Harvest Festival, a community celebration featuring competitions, music, dancing, and food from throughout the territory. Abigail Miller explained that the event served as both harvest celebration and preparation for the coming winter, when travel would become difficult and town social life would center around smaller gatherings. "The entire county attends," Abigail told Hope as they left church the Sunday before the festival. "Ranchers, miners, even some of the Shoshone from Fort Hall. You'll need to have a dress ready for the dance." "A dance?" Hope echoed, startled by this development. "I hadn't thought." "Of course there's a dance," Abigail said with a knowing smile. "And you'll have no shortage of partners, I expect. Half the unmarried men in the county have found reasons to visit the schoolhouse since your arrival." Hope blushed at the observation, though she couldn't deny its accuracy. Various young men had indeed contrived to make her acquaintance: the apothecary's son, a promising young lawyer, even the banker's nephew visiting from Boise. She had been polite but not encouraging, finding none of them particularly compelling. Her thoughts strayed, as they too often did, to Trace. Would he attend the festival, the dance? The idea of seeing him in such a context, perhaps even dancing with him, caused a flutter in her stomach that she firmly suppressed. "I'll need to prepare my students for their recitations," she said, deliberately changing the subject. "Mrs. Edwards mentioned the school traditionally presents something at the festival." "Indeed," Abigail confirmed. Nothing elaborate, a few patriotic recitations, perhaps a song. The children enjoy participating. Hope nodded, already planning appropriate selections. The festival would be an opportunity to showcase her students' progress, and perhaps soften some of the lingering resistance to her teaching methods. The day of the Harvest Festival dawned clear and crisp, perfect autumn weather for an outdoor celebration. Hope rose early to finalize preparations for her students' performance before dressing for the day's activities. She chose a forest green dress that complemented her auburn hair, adding a cameo brooch, her mother's, one of the few treasures saved from the canyon disaster. The town square had been transformed overnight. Stalls displayed local produce and crafts, bunting decorated the buildings, and a platform had been erected for musical performances and speeches. Children darted excitedly between displays, while adults greeted neighbors and visitors with festive enthusiasm. Hope gathered her students near the schoolhouse, reviewing their recitations one final time before their scheduled performance. The children were resplendent in their best clothes, faces scrubbed clean, hair neatly combed or braided. "Remember," she told them, "speak clearly and stand tall. You've prepared wonderfully, and I'm already proud of each of you." From her position with the children, Hope scanned the growing crowd, telling herself she wasn't looking for anyone in particular. Yet when she caught sight of Trace near the judges' table for the agricultural competitions, her heart performed a traitorous leap. He was engaged in conversation with Sheriff Reynolds, looking more formal than she'd seen him previously, in a dark suit jacket over a crisp white shirt. As if sensing her gaze, he glanced in her direction, offering a small nod of recognition before returning to his discussion. The school's performance proceeded admirably, with even the shyest students remembering their lines. Joseph delivered a passage from Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address, with such conviction that several audience members nodded approvingly, momentarily forgetting their prejudices against his heritage. When the children finished, applause rippled through the crowd. Hope beamed with pride as her students took a collective bow before dispersing to enjoy the festival with their families. "Well done, Miss Mercer." She turned to find Trace standing behind her, his expression warm with approval. "The students deserve the credit," she replied, suddenly conscious of her quickened pulse. "They worked diligently to prepare. Under your guidance," he pointed out, "Joseph's delivery was particularly impressive. You've given him confidence the previous teacher never bothered to cultivate." "He's naturally gifted," Hope said. "All he needed was equal opportunity to demonstrate it." Trace studied her for a moment, something unreadable in his eyes. "You've made a difference already. Not many could have accomplished so much in such a short time." The sincerity in his voice brought warmth to her cheeks. "Thank you. That means a great deal, especially from a board member." "I'm not speaking as a board member," he replied quietly. Before she could respond to this intriguing statement, they were interrupted by Abigail Miller, who approached with determined purpose. "Miss Mercer, the committee needs your assistance with the children's games," she announced, eyeing Trace with thinly veiled speculation. "Mr. Galloway, I believe the livestock judging begins shortly. You're participating, are you not?" "I am," Trace confirmed, tipping his hat to both women. "If you'll excuse me, ladies." As he walked away, Abigail turned to Hope with raised eyebrows. "He seems to hold you in high regard." "We share an interest in education," Hope replied, striving for a neutral tone. "Is that all you share?" Abigail asked shrewdly. "The entire town's been wondering since your dramatic arrival." "Mr. Galloway saved my life," Hope said firmly. "I'm naturally grateful, but there's nothing more to the matter than that." Abigail looked unconvinced but mercifully let the subject drop, instead leading Hope toward the area designated for children's activities. The day progressed with competitions, performances, and the sharing of abundant food. Hope found herself fully engaged in community life, conversing with parents, participating in judging the children's art display, and generally cementing her position as Idaho City's respected schoolteacher. By late afternoon, preparations for the evening dance were underway. A large area had been cleared, lanterns strung overhead to illuminate the space as darkness fell. Musicians tuned their instruments, fiddles, a banjo, even an accordion, while townspeople returned to their homes to change for the evening's entertainment. Hope used this interval to refresh herself at the hotel, changing into the dress she'd reserved for the dance, a deep blue silk that had been among her few luxuries brought from Boston. As she pinned up her hair more elaborately than usual, she acknowledged to herself that she was making a particular effort for the evening ahead, and for one potential attendee in particular. When she returned to the town square, the transformation was complete. Lantern light created a warm glow over the dance area. Tables laden with food and drink lined one side, and the musicians had begun playing lively tunes that already had children and a few enthusiastic adults dancing. "Miss Mercer," called a voice she recognized as belonging to Martin Hughes, the young lawyer who had been especially attentive in recent weeks. "May I have the honor of the first dance?" Hope accepted graciously, allowing him to lead her into a spirited Virginia reel. As promised by Abigail, she found herself in demand as a partner, dancing consecutively with the banker's nephew, the apothecary's son, and several ranchers from outlying properties. Throughout these dances, she was acutely aware of Trace's presence at the edge of the gathering. He conversed easily with various townspeople, but made no move to join the dancing, instead watching the proceedings with what appeared to be amused detachment. After declining a third consecutive request from Martin Hughes, Hope retreated to the refreshment table for lemonade and a moment's respite. She was sampling an apple tart when Trace finally approached, looking slightly uncomfortable in the festive setting. "You're popular this evening," he observed, nodding toward several young men who were clearly working up courage to approach her again. Hope sipped her lemonade. "I'm a novelty, nothing more. The first new unmarried woman in Idaho City in some time, according to Mrs. Miller." "I suspect it's more than novelty," Trace replied, his gaze lingering on her in a way that made her pulse quicken. "You dance well." "Thank you." She set down her empty glass. "Though I notice you haven't joined the dancing yourself." A faint smile touched his lips. "I typically avoid it." "Why?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Do you disapprove of dancing?" "Not at all. I simply prefer not to make a spectacle of myself. My talents lie elsewhere." "Now I'm intrigued," Hope said, emboldened by the festive atmosphere. "What talents hide behind that reserved exterior, Mr. Galloway?" Something shifted in his expression, a flash of intensity quickly contained. "Perhaps someday I'll show you." The musicians struck up a waltz, and Hope found herself extending her hand before she could reconsider. "Dance with me," she said, surprised by her own directness. "Just once." Trace hesitated, his eyes moving from her outstretched hand to her face. For a moment she thought he would refuse. Then, with deliberate care, he took her hand. "Just once," he agreed, leading her to the edge of the dance floor, his hand settled at her waist with proper distance, his other maintaining a respectful grip on her fingers. Despite his claimed reluctance, he moved with natural grace, guiding her through the waltz with confident steps. "You dance quite well for someone who avoids it," Hope observed, conscious of the curious glances directed their way. "My mother insisted on lessons," he admitted. said no son of hers would stumble around a ballroom regardless of his preferences. She sounds formidable, she was. A shadow crossed his features. She died before I came west. Influenza. I'm sorry, Hope said softly, understanding now why he'd spoken of his mother in the past tense. It was long ago. He guided her through a turn, his movements perfectly timed to the music. What of your family? Do they approve of your western adventure? Hope sighed. Hardly. My father called it reckless foolishness and predicted I'd return within a month, properly humbled by frontier realities. And now that you've survived a canyon flood, established yourself as a respected teacher, and integrated a divided classroom, Trace asked, a hint of admiration in his tone. He doesn't know about any of that, Hope admitted. I've written, but mail is unreliable, Trace finished for her, especially to the east. Yes. She hesitated, then added, and perhaps I've been reluctant to share too much. They disapproved so strongly of my coming here. You've proven yourself right, Trace said simply. That's what matters. The waltz ended too soon, in Hope's estimation. Trace released her with proper formality, though his fingers lingered against hers a moment longer than strictly necessary. Thank you for the dance, Miss Mercer, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. It was unexpected. Before she could respond, Martin Hughes approached, clearly intent on reclaiming her attention. Trace stepped back with a slight bow, leaving Hope to her persistent admirer while feeling oddly bereft at his departure. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly enough, though no subsequent dance matched the quiet intensity of the waltz with Trace. Hope found herself watching him as he moved through the gathering, speaking with ranchers, merchants, and even to her surprise spending considerable time in conversation with Joseph's father, who had come to town for the festival. As the celebration wound down, Hope bid farewell to the Millers and other acquaintances, intending to return to her hotel room. She had just retrieved her shawl when Trace materialized beside her. "May I walk you back to the Iron Horse?" he asked, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Thank you," she accepted, wondering at his motivation but pleased by the offer nonetheless. They walked in companionable silence for a time, the sounds of the festival receding behind them. The night was clear, stars brilliant against the black sky, the air carrying the first hints of winter's approach. "Your students performed admirably today," Trace said eventually. "You've accomplished much with them in a short time." "There's still much to do," Hope replied. "Particularly with the older students who have had inconsistent education, but they are eager to learn, which makes the task rewarding. The town's fortunate to have you." He glanced at her, his expression softening in the moonlight. "Not many would have persevered after losing everything in the canyon." "Not everything," Hope corrected him. "I lost possessions, not purpose." They reached the hotel entrance, pausing at the bottom of the steps. Hope turned to face him, suddenly reluctant to end the evening. "Will you be at next month's board meeting?" she asked. "Unlikely," Trace replied. "I'm traveling to Boise for the territorial legislature session representing county interests. I'll be away most of November." "Oh." Hope couldn't hide her disappointment entirely. "That sounds important work." "Necessary, if not particularly enjoyable." He studied her face for a moment. "Would you permit me to call on you when I return? Properly, I mean." Hope's breath caught at the unexpected question. "Call on me, for conversation, perhaps a meal." His voice remained steady, though she detected a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "Unless you'd prefer the attentions of young Mr. Hughes or the banker's nephew." Hope couldn't help smiling at the trace of jealousy in his tone. "I would welcome your call, Mr. Galloway." Relief flickered across his features. "Until December, then." In a gesture that took her completely by surprise, he reached for her hand, raising it briefly to his lips in a gesture more suited to Eastern drawing rooms than an Idaho mining town. "Good night, Hope," he said softly, using her given name for the first time since their journey through the canyon. "Good night, Trace," she replied, equally soft. She watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into the shadows, her hand still tingling from the brief contact of his lips. Something had shifted between them, tonight something significant that both thrilled and terrified her with its possibilities. November brought the first snowfall to Idaho City, transforming the landscape into a pristine wonderland that delighted the children but complicated travel. Hope found herself fully occupied with teaching, particularly as several new students enrolled midterm children from remote homesteads whose families had moved closer to town for the winter months. With Trace away at the territorial legislature, Hope threw herself into preparations for the school's Christmas program, organizing recitations, songs, and even a simple dramatic presentation of Dickens' A Christmas Carol, using the volume Trace had given her as source material. Her integration efforts continued to bear fruit. Joseph had emerged as a natural leader among the older students, his academic excellence earning reluctant respect even from children whose parents harbored prejudice. His sister Sarah had revealed an extraordinary talent for drawing that Hope encouraged with special assignments illustrating stories for the younger children. Letters arrived sporadically from Boston, her mother's filled with social news and thinly veiled hopes for Hope's return, her father's more directly questioning the wisdom of her continued frontier experiment. Hope responded faithfully, describing her work and the community but omitting mention of the canyon disaster or of Trace Galloway. Some aspects of her new life seemed too personal to share with those who had so doubted her resolve. December arrived with deepening snow and preparations for the holiday season. The promised call from Trace had not materialized, though Hope told herself this was likely due to extended legislative sessions or difficult travel conditions. Still, she found herself watching the road from boys with embarrassing frequency, hoping to glimpse a familiar figure returning to Idaho City. The school's Christmas program was scheduled for the evening of December 18th, with the entire community invited to attend. Hope spent the day overseeing final preparations, arranging the schoolroom to accommodate an audience and calming nervous children. As parents and townspeople began filing in that evening, Hope scanned the crowd, trying to temper her disappointment when a certain tall figure failed to appear. The program must proceed regardless, she told herself firmly, directing her students to their positions. The performance exceeded even Hope's expectations. The children delivered their pieces with enthusiasm, the carols rang out sweetly, and the dramatization of A Christmas Carol drew appreciative laughter and applause. Even Ebenezer Scrooge, portrayed with surprising nuance by Joseph, received a standing ovation from the audience. As families congratulated their children afterward, Hope began tidying the schoolroom, her spirits lifting despite Trace's absence. The evening had been a success, a demonstration of what her students could achieve when given proper guidance and equal opportunity. She was arranging desks back into their usual formation when a voice from the doorway startled her. "I'm sorry I missed the performance." Hope whirled to find Trace standing just inside the schoolroom, snow dusting the shoulders of his coat, his expression weary but warm as he regarded her. "You're back," she said, unable to hide her pleasure at the sight of him. "Just rode in," he confirmed, removing his hat. "Came straight here when I heard the school program was tonight. Seems I arrived too late." "The children would have appreciated your attendance," Hope said, trying to maintain a professional tone despite her racing pulse. "And their teacher," Trace asked, moving further into the room. Would she have appreciated my attendance as well? The directness of his question caught Hope off guard. Yes, she admitted finally. I would have been glad to see you there, he nodded, as if confirming something to himself. The legislative session ran longer than expected. Roads back were nearly impassable with the snow. You must be exhausted, Hope said, noting the shadows under his eyes. Yet you came directly here. I made a promise to call on you, he reminded her. I keep my promises, Hope. The use of her given name sent a small thrill through her. It's late for a proper call, she observed, though she made no move to dismiss him. True, he acknowledged. Perhaps you'd allow me to escort you to dinner tomorrow evening instead. The hotel dining room at 7. I'd like that, Hope replied, abandoning any pretense of indifference. Very much. A genuine smile transformed his tired features. Then I'll call for you at your hotel. He hesitated, then added, I've thought of you often while in Boys. The simple admission warmed Hope more than any elaborate declaration could have. I've thought of you as well, she confessed, surprising herself with her candor. Something flickered in his eyes, a heat quickly banked. Until tomorrow, then, he said, replacing his hat. Rest well, Hope. He departed as suddenly as he'd appeared, leaving Hope to wonder at the strange chemistry between them, this pull that seemed to strengthen rather than diminish with time and distance. The following evening found Hope preparing for dinner with uncharacteristic nervousness. She chose her garnet-colored dress, the most elegant she owned, and arranged her hair with particular care. When the hotel clerk informed her that Mr. Galloway awaited her in the lobby, she took a steadying breath before descending the stairs. Trace stood near the fireplace, his tall figure commanding even in this refined setting. He'd clearly made an effort for the evening, dressed in a well-tailored dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. At her appearance, he straightened, his eyes warming as they took in her appearance. Miss Mercer, he greeted her formally, though his expression was anything but formal. You look beautiful this evening. Thank you, Mr. Galloway, she replied, accepting his offered arm. You're looking well yourself. The dining room was relatively quiet, with only a few tables occupied, a benefit of dining slightly later than the usual Idaho City supper hour. They were seated at a corner table that offered both privacy and a view of the snow-covered street through frosted windows. Once they had ordered, Trace relaxed visibly, the stiffness of formal etiquette giving way to more natural conversation. He told her about his experiences at the territorial legislature, the political maneuvering, the debates over infrastructure and Indian affairs, the tentative discussions of eventual statehood. Most fascinating was meeting delegates from across the territory, he explained. Mining interests from the north, agricultural representatives from the south, each with different priorities but a shared vision for Idaho's future. Hope listened, captivated by his obvious engagement with territorial governance. You speak like a man with political ambitions, she observed. Trace shook his head. Not ambitions, obligations, perhaps. Someone needs to ensure the voices of small ranchers and farmers are heard alongside the mining companies and railroad interests. You care deeply about this place, Hope said, understanding something fundamental about him in that moment. It's more than just where you live. It's home, he replied simply. Not where I was born, but where I chose to belong. He studied her thoughtfully. What about you? Is Idaho City becoming home or just a temporary adventure? The question carried weight beyond casual dinner conversation. Hope considered her answer carefully. When I left Boston, I thought this might be temporary, a brief Western sojourn before returning to the life my parents expected. She met his eyes directly. But now, I can't imagine leaving. My students, the school, This community, they've become part of who I am. Satisfaction flickered across his features. I'm glad to hear it. Their meal arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. As they ate, Hope found herself studying Trace when he wasn't looking. The strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the faint scar near his left temple that she'd never noticed before. "You're staring, Miss Mercer," he observed without looking up, a hint of amusement in his voice. Heat rose in her cheeks. "I was wondering about your scar," she admitted, deciding honesty was preferable to denial. His fingers rose unconsciously to touch the mark. "Shrapnel at Gettysburg. I was fortunate many weren't." "Is that why you came west, after the war?" Trace set down his fork, considering the question. "Partly. What I saw during those years. It changed how I viewed the life waiting for me in Pennsylvania. My father expected me to join his law practice, follow the path he'd planned." A rueful smile touched his lips. "Sound familiar?" Hope nodded, recognizing the parallel to her own situation. "So you rebelled." "I sought something authentic," he corrected gently. "A place where a man is judged by his actions rather than his family connections or social standing. The war stripped away illusions about what matters in life." "And you found what you sought here?" "I found possibility," Trace replied, his gaze holding hers. "Room to build something meaningful, the chance to be defined by choices rather than circumstances." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they finished their meal. Community happenings during his absence, preparations for Christmas throughout the town, the progress of specific students Hope had mentioned in previous conversations. Trace listened intently as she described Joseph's natural leadership and Sarah's artistic talent. "You see potential where others don't bother to look," he observed as the waiter cleared their plates. "It's a rare quality." "It's simply paying attention," Hope demurred. "Any teacher would do the same." "No," Trace said with quiet certainty. "They wouldn't. The previous teacher saw only obstacles, not possibilities. You've transformed that classroom in 3 months." His praise warmed her more than she cared to admit. The children deserve credit for their willingness to adapt, particularly the Shoshone students who had every reason to distrust another white teacher. "Their parents speak highly of you," Trace told her. "I met with several families during a visit to Fort Hall before the legislative session. Your reputation has spread beyond Idaho City." This was news to Hope. "I hadn't realized." The agent at Fort Hall mentioned increased interest in sending children to school. "Your approach has not gone unnoticed." His expression grew serious. "It matters, Hope. What you're doing matters tremendously." The intensity in his voice stirred something deep within her, a recognition of shared values that transcended their different backgrounds and experiences. After dinner, Trace suggested a walk despite the cold. "The town is beautiful in fresh snow," he said. "If you're not too tired," Hope agreed readily, retrieving her coat and gloves from the hotel clerk. Outside, Idaho City had transformed into a winter wonderland, with snow-covered buildings glowing in the moonlight and icicles hanging from eaves like crystal decorations. They walked slowly down the main street, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Few people were about at this hour, giving them a sense of privacy despite being in the heart of town. "I brought something for you," Trace said unexpectedly, reaching into his coat pocket. "From Boys." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Hope accepted it with surprise. "You needn't have brought me anything," she protested. "Open it," he encouraged, watching her face. Hope carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a small leather-bound volume of poetry by Emily Dickinson. "It was published just last year," Trace explained. "I thought it might complement the collection I gave you for the school." Hope traced the embossed title with gentle fingers, deeply touched by the thoughtful gift. "Thank you. I've read some of her work in periodicals, but I've never owned a complete collection." "The bookseller in Boys recommended it," Trace admitted. "Said it was gaining popularity among literary circles back east." The fact that he'd sought out a bookshop in Boys specifically to find something she might appreciate moved Hope deeply. It revealed a consideration that went beyond mere courtesy. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Truly." They continued walking, the conversation flowing easily between them. As they passed the schoolhouse, Hope paused, noting lamplight still glowing from within. "That's strange," she murmured. "I'm certain I extinguished all lamps when I left this afternoon." Trace frowned, instantly alert. "Stay here," he instructed, moving toward the building with cautious steps. Hope ignored this directive, following close behind him as he approached the schoolhouse door, which stood slightly ajar. He pushed it open carefully, then relaxed at what he saw inside. Joseph sat at one of the desks, papers spread before him, a lamp burning low beside his work. He looked up in alarm at their entrance. "Miss Mercer, Mr. Galloway." He stood quickly, clearly embarrassed at being discovered. "I'm sorry, I should have asked permission to use the schoolroom." "Joseph," Hope said, stepping past Trace. "What are you doing here so late? Your parents must be worried." The boy shook his head. "They know where I am. I needed." He hesitated, then gestured to the papers before him. "I'm practicing my writing for the territorial essay contest you mentioned." Hope moved closer, examining the pages covered in Joseph's neat handwriting. The essay was titled "Two Worlds: Life Between Shoshone Tradition and American Education." "You're entering the contest?" she asked, unable to hide her pleasure at this development. Joseph nodded, his expression a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "You said any student could submit an entry, but I needed a quiet place to work. My brothers make it difficult to concentrate at home." "Of course you should enter," Hope said warmly. "And you're welcome to use the schoolroom, though perhaps during daylight hours would be safer." Trace had been examining Joseph's work over Hope's shoulder. "This is excellent," he said, pointing to a particularly well-crafted paragraph. "Your perspective is unique, exactly what such contests need." Joseph looked surprised by Trace's approval. "You think they would consider an essay from someone like me?" "I think they would be fools not to," Trace replied firmly. "The contest guidelines say nothing about background, only that entrants must be students in Idaho Territory schools." Hope felt a surge of pride in both Joseph's initiative and Trace's immediate support. "Mr. Galloway is right. Your essay deserves consideration alongside any other. In fact, your unique perspective may give you an advantage." Joseph's expression brightened. "I'll finish it then, and submit it before the January deadline." "Good man," Trace said, clapping him lightly on the shoulder. "Now pack up your things. I'll escort you home. It's too late and cold for you to walk alone." "That's not necessary, sir," Joseph began, but Trace shook his head. "Non-negotiable." "Miss Mercer and I interrupted your work. Least I can do is see you safely home." Hope helped Joseph gather his papers while Trace extinguished the lamp. The three left the schoolhouse together, with Hope locking the door securely behind them. "I'll walk Joseph home and then return to escort you back to the hotel," Trace told Hope when they reached the main street. "That's not necessary," Hope protested. "The hotel is just there. I can see it from here." "Nonetheless," Trace replied with quiet firmness, "I'll return shortly." Hope watched as they walked away, Joseph matching Trace's long strides as they headed toward the edge of town where several Shoshone families had established winter residences. The sight of them together, the rancher and the Shoshone boy in earnest conversation, stirred something profound in her heart. True to his word, Trace returned 15 minutes later, his cheeks reddened from the cold night air. Joseph's family welcomed me like an old friend, he reported as they walked the short distance back to the Iron Horse. His father asked me to convey their gratitude for your encouragement of their children. I'm simply doing my job, Hope demurred. No, Trace said, stopping to face her directly. You're doing far more than that, and they know it. As do I. They had reached the hotel entrance, the warm glow from within spilling onto the snow-covered steps. Hope turned to bid him good night, but the intensity in his gaze held her silent. I've been thinking about you constantly since that day in the canyon, Trace said quietly, his voice barely audible above the winter night sounds. At first I told myself it was concern for your welfare, then interest in your success as a teacher. Now, he hesitated, searching for words. Now I find I can no longer pretend my feelings are so straightforward. Hope's heart hammered against her ribs. What are you saying, Trace? I'm saying that I care for you, he replied simply. More than is proper for a school board member. More than is wise for a man who lives 10 miles from town and spends most days working a ranch from dawn till dusk. The rawness of his confession took Hope's breath away. She began, then faltered. Overwhelmed by the emotions his words had unleashed, Trace shook his head. Don't answer now. Take time to consider what I've said. He took a step back, physically giving her space. I'll call on you again if you're amenable, perhaps for the Christmas Eve service at the church. Hope nodded, finding her voice at last. Yes, I'd like that. A smile touched his lips, relieved, tentative. Good night, Hope. Good night, Trace. He waited until she had entered the hotel before turning away, his tall figure soon disappearing into the snowy night. Hope climbed the stairs to her room in a daze, clutching her poetry book like a talisman. The days leading up to Christmas Eve passed in a blur of school activities and holiday preparations. Hope found herself constantly distracted, replaying Trace's words in her mind and examining her own feelings with unprecedented honesty. She had come to Idaho territory seeking independence and purpose, not romance. Yet there was no denying the connection that had formed between them, a bond forged initially in crisis, but deepened through shared values and mutual respect. When she imagined her future in Idaho City, she could no longer picture it without Trace Galloway somehow present in the narrative. Christmas Eve arrived with perfect weather-clear skies, crisp air, and snow-covered landscapes that reminded Hope of illustrations from childhood storybooks. She dressed carefully for the evening church service, choosing a deep crimson dress that complemented the season and arranging her hair in a style more elaborate than her usual schoolteacher's coiffure. As promised, Trace called for her at the hotel, looking handsome in formal attire with a sprig of holly in his lapel. His expression when he saw her conveyed appreciation more eloquent than words. "Miss Mercer," he greeted her, offering his arm. "Shall we?" The church was already filling with townspeople when they arrived, the interior transformed by evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and dozens of candles. They found seats in a pew near the middle, nodding to acquaintances as the congregation settled. Hope was acutely aware of Trace beside her, the solid warmth of his presence, the faint scent of shaving soap, the careful way he held the hymnal between them so she could see the verses. They sang together, his deep baritone blending with her clear soprano in perfect harmony. Reverend Miller delivered a sermon about hope and new beginnings, drawing parallels between the Nativity story and the pioneer spirit that had built communities like Idaho City. Hope found herself repeatedly glancing at Trace, wondering if he too felt the relevance of these themes to their own situation. After the service concluded, they joined other congregants in the church hall for wassail and Christmas biscuits. Hope was repeatedly drawn into conversations with parents and community members, while Trace spoke with ranchers and business associates. Despite this separation, Hope remained conscious of his presence across the room, occasionally catching his eye with a shared smile that felt like a private communication. As the gathering began to disperse, Trace made his way back to her side. "May I walk you home?" he asked quietly. Outside, the night was magical, stars brilliant in the clear sky, snow crunching beneath their boots, Christmas candles glowing from windows throughout the town. They walked slowly, neither seeming eager to end the evening. "I've been thinking about what you said," Hope began when they were beyond earshot of other churchgoers. "About your feelings." Trace slowed his pace, giving her his full attention. "And I care for you too," she admitted, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "More than I expected to care for anyone here. More than is perhaps wise for a schoolteacher whose position depends on community respect." He stopped walking entirely, turning to face her. "Hope, please, let me finish," she interrupted gently. "When my wagon broke in that canyon and you appeared like some apparition in the rain, I was terrified, not just of the flood, but of depending on a stranger in such a vulnerable moment." She met his eyes directly. "You told me I'd reach the end with you beside me." "At the time, I thought you meant the end of the canyon trail." "I did," Trace acknowledged, his expression softening. "But it's come to mean more," Hope continued. "These past months, whenever I've faced a challenge with the school board, with reluctant parents, with my own doubts, I've found strength in remembering that moment. Your certainty gave me courage." Trace reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. "You've always had courage, Hope. I merely recognized it before you did." The tenderness in his voice undid her careful composure. "I've never felt this way before," she confessed. "It's terrifying and wonderful all at once." "I know," he said simply, his thumb tracing circles on her gloved palm. "For me as well." They stood in silence for a moment, snowflakes beginning to fall gently around them, the sounds of Christmas celebrations echoing faintly from nearby homes. "What happens now?" Hope asked finally. Trace considered this. "Traditional courtship would be my preference. Calling on you properly, spending time together when your duties and mine permit." His eyes held a question. "Would that be acceptable to you?" Hope smiled, warmed by his old-fashioned formality. "Yes, though I suspect Idaho City will buzz with speculation regardless of how proper we are." "Let them speculate," Trace said, a hint of defiance in his tone. "We have nothing to be ashamed of." They resumed walking, hands still joined between them, the connection feeling both new and somehow familiar, as if they had been moving toward this moment since their first meeting in the canyon. When they reached the hotel, Trace released her hand reluctantly. "Merry Christmas, Hope," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Trace." He hesitated, then leaned forward to place the gentlest of kisses on her cheek, a gesture so proper yet so intimate that it left Hope breathless. "I'll call on you tomorrow," he promised, "for Christmas dinner at the ranch if you're willing. My foreman's wife has been cooking for days in anticipation." "You told them I might come?" Hope asked, surprised. A hint of sheepishness crossed his features. "I hoped you might." "Then yes," she said, smiling up at him. "I'd be delighted." The following day, Trace arrived at the hotel promptly at midday, driving a handsome sleigh pulled by two matched gray horses. Hope was waiting in the lobby, wearing her warmest coat and a new woolen scarf, a Christmas gift from Abigail Miller. "This is quite the conveyance," she remarked as he helped her into the sleigh, tucking thick fur blankets around her legs. "Christmas merits special arrangements," Trace replied, settling beside her and taking up the reins. "And I wanted your first visit to the Silver Spoon to be memorable." The journey to the ranch was like something from a storybook gliding over snow-covered landscape. passing through pine forests where branches hung heavy with white, crossing a frozen creek that sparkled in the winter sunshine. Hope marveled at the beauty of the countryside, understanding better why Trace had chosen this particular place to build his life. The Silver Spoon Ranch announced itself with a substantial log archway spanning the entrance road. Beyond stretched well-maintained buildings, a large main house, bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings, all arranged with practical efficiency around a central yard. "It's larger than I expected," Hope admitted as they approached. "Started small," Trace explained. "Built onto it each year as the herd grew. The main house was just 4 rooms when I bought the place. Now it's comfortable, if not fancy." A man and woman emerged from the main house as the sleigh drew near. Clint and Martha Jenkins, Trace's foreman, and his wife, who welcomed Hope with genuine warmth. "We've heard so much about the schoolteacher who survived Timber Canyon," Martha exclaimed, ushering Hope inside. Though Trace has been mighty close-mouthed about the details. The interior of the ranch house revealed much about its owner. Solid, well-crafted furniture filled rooms decorated with a combination of practical items and unexpected touches of refinement. A grandfather clock in the hallway, landscape paintings on the walls, bookshelves filled with volumes that matched those he'd donated to the school. Martha had prepared a feast that would have impressed Boston society: roast goose, venison, side dishes of every description, and pies cooling on the sideboard for dessert. "You've gone to too much trouble," Hope protested when she saw the dining table. "Nonsense," Martha replied cheerfully. "It's Christmas, and we've finally got a lady at the table. The men can mind their manners for once." Dinner was a lively affair, with Clint sharing ranch stories that had Hope alternately laughing and marveling at the challenges of frontier ranching. Trace was more relaxed than she'd seen him before, teasing his foreman, complimenting Martha's cooking with genuine appreciation, and watching Hope with undisguised pleasure as she engaged easily with his employees. After the meal, Martha insisted on showing Hope through the house while the men discussed some ranch business. The tour concluded in Trace's study, a room that revealed more of the man than anything else Hope had seen. Bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with volumes on law, history, agriculture, and literature. A large desk stood before windows overlooking the snow-covered pastures, papers neatly arranged beside an inkwell and pen. Most revealing were the personal touches: a framed photograph of a distinguished couple who must be his parents, a cavalry saber mounted above the fireplace, and a collection of maps showing the evolution of Idaho Territory. "He's quite a man, our Trace," Martha remarked, watching Hope examine the room. "Educated as they come, could have been anything back east, but chose this life instead." "Why did he?" Hope asked, genuinely curious. "He's mentioned the war, but—" Martha nodded, understanding. "Changed him, that war did. Came west looking for something honest, is how he puts it. Built this place from near nothing into one of the finest small spreads in the territory." She gave Hope a meaningful look. "Never shown interest in any woman hereabouts, though plenty have tried to catch his eye." Before Hope could respond to this revelation, Trace himself appeared in the doorway. "Showing off my sanctuary, Martha?" he asked, though his tone held no reproach. "Miss Mercer was admiring your books," Martha replied innocently. "I'll just check on those pies now." She departed with a knowing smile that caused color to rise in Hope's cheeks. "Martha has a tendency to meddle," Trace said apologetically once they were alone, "though always with good intentions." "She's lovely," Hope assured him, turning back to the bookshelves. "And your collection is impressive. I see where the school's new books originated." "Only a small portion," Trace demurred, moving to stand beside her. I couldn't part with all my literary companions. Hope ran her fingers along leather spines, noting titles ranging from Greek philosophy to contemporary poetry. You're full of surprises, Mr. Galloway. Most ranchers I've met don't maintain libraries that would impress a university professor. Most ranchers didn't spend 4 years at Harvard before the war interrupted their legal studies, he replied with a hint of self-deprecation. Hope turned to him in surprise. Harvard? You never mentioned that. He shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. Seemed irrelevant to ranching. And out here, Eastern credentials often create more suspicion than respect. Still, Hope said, reassessing yet again the complexity of the man before her. It explains much about you. Does it? He asked, genuinely curious. Your vocabulary, your knowledge of literature. The way you construct arguments at board meetings. She smiled slightly. Though not your horsemanship or ranch management skills, I assume those came later. A genuine laugh escaped him. Much later, and with many painful lessons. He gestured toward the leather armchairs flanking the fireplace. Shall we sit? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Hope settled into one of the chairs, noting how naturally she felt at home in this room, as if it were a space created precisely for minds like theirs to connect. Trace sat opposite her, his expression turning serious. I've been offered a position, he said without preamble, as Idaho's representative to the Territorial Education Committee. It would involve quarterly travel to Boise and consultation with schools throughout the region. That's a significant honor, Hope observed, immediately understanding the implications. And well-deserved. Your advocacy at the legislature made an impression. He nodded acknowledgement. I'm inclined to accept, but wanted your opinion first. My opinion. Hope echoed, surprised by this request. Surely this is your decision based on your own interests and the needs of your ranch. It is, Trace agreed. But it would also affect whatever may be developing between us. His eyes held hers steadily. If I accept, I'll be away from Idaho City more frequently, but also more directly involved with educational matters that concern you professionally. Hope understood his concern. You're worried about a conflict of interest. Among other things, he admitted. The last thing I want is to complicate your position here, or subject you to gossip that might undermine your authority as a teacher. The consideration behind his hesitation touched Hope deeply. Here was a man who thought beyond his own ambitions to consider their impact on others, particularly on her. I think you should accept, she said firmly. Your perspective would benefit schools throughout the territory, including ours. As for personal considerations. She paused, gathering courage. I believe what's developing between us is strong enough to withstand both separation and scrutiny. Relief and something warmer flickered in his eyes. You're certain? I am, Hope confirmed, though I appreciate your consideration in asking my opinion. It's not something I'm accustomed to from men in positions of influence. Perhaps that's part of what drew me to you, Trace said quietly. Your independence of thought. Your unwillingness to be merely decorative or compliant, as so many expect women to be. Hope felt something shift between them, a deepening of connection beyond the initial attraction that had been building since their first meeting. This was a partnership forming between equals, each respecting the other's mind as well as heart. In that case, Trace continued, reaching into his pocket, there's something else I'd like your opinion on. He withdrew a small leather pouch, loosening its drawstring to extract something that caught the winter sunlight streaming through the study windows. Hope's breath caught as he held out a ring, a delicate band of gold supporting a modest but exquisite sapphire flanked by tiny diamonds. This was my grandmother's, Trace explained, his voice steady despite the momentous nature of the moment. I'm not proposing today that would be premature by any standard, but I want you to know my intentions are serious, and in time, if our feelings continue to develop as they have been." He trailed off, watching her expression carefully. Hope's heart raced as she grasped the significance of what he was sharing. Not a proposal, but a declaration of intent, a promise of future possibility when they had come to know each other more fully. "It's beautiful," she said softly, looking from the ring to his face. "And I'm deeply honored by what it represents." Trace nodded, returning the ring to its pouch with careful movements. "I'll keep it safe until the proper time comes, if it comes." He met her eyes directly. "I don't want to rush you, Hope, or pressure you in any way. You came west seeking independence, not entanglement." "True," she acknowledged. "But I'm discovering that independence doesn't preclude connection. Perhaps it even makes true partnership possible, entering it by choice rather than necessity or convention." His expression softened with understanding. "Precisely." They were interrupted by Martha calling them for dessert, the moment suspended between them like a promise. As they rejoined the others for pie and coffee, Hope caught Trace watching her with an expression that mingled tenderness with something deeper, a recognition of possibility that made her future in Idaho Territory seem suddenly richer and more meaningful than she had ever imagined when her wagon first broke in that canyon rain. Winter deepened into January, bringing the coldest temperatures Hope had experienced. School continued despite the weather, with students arriving bundled in layers of clothing, their breath visible in the classroom until the pot-bellied stove reached full strength each morning. True to his word, Trace called on Hope with proper formality whenever he was in town, escorting her to community events, joining her for dinner at the hotel, occasionally bringing her to the ranch for Sunday dinner with the Jenkins. Their courtship progressed with measured steps, respected by the community that had come to appreciate both the schoolteacher and the rancher individually. In February, Joseph's essay won honorable mention in the territorial contest, an unprecedented achievement for a Shoshone student. The school board, at Trace's suggestion, held a special assembly to recognize his accomplishment, inviting his family and tribal elders to attend. The event marked a turning point in community relations, with even former skeptics acknowledging the value of Hope's integrated classroom approach. Spring arrived gradually, melting snow revealing mud season before giving way to the vibrant green of new growth. With improved weather came increased activity, Trace busy with calving season and preparations for summer grazing, Hope organizing end-of-term examinations, and planning for the following school year. Their time together remained precious, but limited by their respective responsibilities. Yet each encounter deepened their connection, conversations ranging from educational philosophy to territorial politics to personal histories shared with increasing openness. On the anniversary of their first meeting that stormy day in Timber Canyon, Trace arrived unexpectedly at the schoolhouse after dismissal. He found Hope organizing student work for the year-end exhibition, her sleeves rolled up, hair escaping its pins after a long day of teaching. "You're a sight for sore eyes," he said from the doorway, causing her to look up with a startled smile. "Trace, I wasn't expecting you until the board meeting tomorrow." "Couldn't wait," he replied, crossing to her desk. "Do you know what day it is?" Hope paused, mentally calculating. Realization dawned in her eyes. "The canyon," she said softly. "It's been a year." He nodded, reaching for her hand. "A year since you drove your wagon into that canyon, determined to reach Idaho City despite the storm. A year since you appeared like an answer to an unspoken prayer," she countered, her fingers twining with his. "I've been thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't taken that trail that day," Trace said, his expression solemn. If I'd chosen the northern route instead, if we'd never met. But we did meet, Hope reminded him gently. And here we are. Here we are, he echoed, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in a gesture that had become familiar and dear. Hope, I have something to ask you. Her heart quickened as he reached into his pocket, withdrawing the leather pouch she remembered from Christmas Day. This time, however, he didn't simply show her the ring. Instead, he lowered himself to one knee before her desk, his expression a mixture of certainty and vulnerability that took her breath away. Hope Mercer, he began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. This year has shown me what true partnership can be between two people who respect each other's independence while choosing to build something together. You've brought light and purpose not just to Idaho City, but to my life specifically. He opened the pouch, removing the sapphire ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I love you, completely and without reservation. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Hope's vision blurred with tears as the words she had both expected and longed for finally materialized. The answer formed in her heart before reaching her lips. Yes, she said simply. Yes, Trace. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if destined to rest there. Rising to his feet, he gathered her into his arms, his embrace conveying everything words could not. Their kiss was both tender and promising, a seal on the commitment they had just made and a harbinger of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, Hope rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. What will your parents think? Trace asked softly. Their daughter marrying a Western rancher rather than a Boston gentleman, Hope smiled against his shirt. They'll be scandalized at first, then resigned. Eventually, when they meet you, they'll understand why I chose as I did. And you're certain about this life. His arms tightened slightly around her. It won't always be easy. The territory is still developing, the winters harsh, the comforts fewer than what you knew in Boston. Hope leaned back to meet his gaze directly. I've never been more certain of anything, she assured him. This is where I belong, teaching these children, building this community, sharing my life with you. The conviction in her voice eased whatever lingering doubt had prompted his question. He kissed her again, briefly but fervently. When shall we marry? He asked when they separated. I don't wish for a long engagement. Hope considered this practical question. After the school term ends in June, that would give us summer to establish our household before classes resume in September. Trace nodded agreement. A June wedding, then. At the church in Idaho City, with the whole community to witness. And afterward, Hope asked, would we live at the ranch? It's a considerable distance for daily travel to the school. I've been thinking about that, Trace admitted. The Silver Spoon has prospered these past years. I could build a second home in town, not large, but comfortable enough for a teacher and her rancher husband. We would divide our time between town and the ranch, as responsibilities dictate. The thoughtful consideration behind this suggestion, balancing both their needs without expecting either to sacrifice their purpose, confirmed for Hope that she had chosen wisely. This was a man who saw her as a true partner, not an accessory to his life. That sounds perfect, she said warmly. Though I warn you, students may appear on our doorstep at inconvenient hours with questions or concerns. And ranchers may interrupt dinner with news of calving emergencies, he countered with a smile. We'll manage together. The word held such promise now, a shared future built on mutual respect and genuine love. News of their engagement spread through Idaho City with predictable speed. Congratulations poured in from townspeople, students, and neighboring ranchers alike. Abigail Miller immediately volunteered to help with wedding preparations. while Martha Jenkins insisted on hosting an engagement dinner at the Silver Spoon. Hope wrote to her parents, announcing both her engagement and her intention to make Idaho Territory her permanent home. Their response, when it arrived weeks later, was cautiously supportive, her mother expressing hope that she might at least return east for a proper wedding, her father requesting details about Trace's background and prospects. "They're making an effort," Hope observed as she and Trace read the letter together. "It's more than I expected, honestly. We'll invite them for a visit after we're settled," Trace suggested. "Once they see what you've built here, your school, your place in the community, they'll understand your choice better." Spring advanced into early summer, the Idaho landscape transforming with wildflowers and new growth. Wedding preparations proceeded alongside end-of-term school activities and ranch operations, the couple finding moments together amidst their busy schedules. On the final day of the school term, Hope's students surprised her with handmade gifts and a special recitation in honor of her upcoming marriage. Joseph and Sarah had organized the presentation, involving every student in creating a bound collection of stories and drawings depicting their teacher's first year in Idaho City. "From the canyon to the classroom," Joseph said as he presented the volume, his English now nearly perfect after a year under Hope's tutelage. "We wanted you to remember how much you've changed things for us." Hope accepted the gift with tears in her eyes, deeply moved by this tangible evidence of her impact. "I'll treasure this always," she promised, "and I'll be back in September with a new name but the same commitment to each of you." The wedding day dawned clear and warm, a perfect June Saturday that seemed designed for celebration. The church had been decorated with wildflowers gathered by Hope's students, their vibrant colors brightening the simple interior. In the minister's study, where she prepared for the ceremony, Hope was surprised by a knock at the door. Abigail Miller answered it, then turned with an expression of astonishment. "Hope, dear, there's someone here to see you." Hope looked up from adjusting her veil to see her mother standing in the doorway, elegant in a traveling suit that spoke of Boston tailoring and considerable expense. "Mother," she gasped, rising from her chair, "how are you here? Your letter said you couldn't make the journey." Elizabeth Mercer stepped forward, her eyes taking in her daughter's appearance with evident emotion. "Your father and I reconsidered. We couldn't miss our only daughter's wedding, no matter how far we had to travel." She touched Hope's cheek gently. "You look beautiful, my dear, and happier than I've ever seen you." "I am happy," Hope confirmed, embracing her mother with genuine joy. "Is father here as well?" "Outside with your young man," Elizabeth replied. "Interrogating him about ranch management and territorial politics, I imagine. They seemed deep in conversation when I left them." Hope laughed, picturing this encounter between the two most significant men in her life. "And what do you think of Trace?" she asked, suddenly eager for her mother's impression. Elizabeth considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "He's not what I expected," she admitted. "More educated, more refined in his thinking, yet there's a strength about him that seems born of this place." She met her daughter's eyes directly. "I can see why you chose him, Hope, and why you chose to stay." This understanding, so unexpected yet so deeply desired, brought tears to Hope's eyes. "Thank you, Mother. That means everything." The ceremony itself was beautiful in its simplicity. Hope walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her gaze fixed on Trace waiting at the altar. He watched her approach with undisguised adoration, his customary reserve melting into an expression of such joy that murmurs of appreciation rippled through the congregation. Their vows were traditional yet personally meaningful, spoken with clear voices that carried to the farthest corners of the packed church. When Reverend Miller pronounced them husband and wife, Trace's kiss was restrained but tender, appropriate for a public ceremony, yet conveying a depth of feeling that brought color to Hope's cheeks. The celebration afterward spilled from the church into the town square, where tables had been arranged and decorated for a community feast. Everyone had contributed something: Martha Jenkins' famous pies, the hotel's finest dishes, specialties from the various ethnic communities that composed Idaho City's population. Hope and Trace moved through the gathering, accepting congratulations and introducing her parents to friends and neighbors. To Hope's delight, her father seemed genuinely interested in the community, engaging thoughtfully with ranchers and merchants alike. "Your father's been asking about investment opportunities in the territory," Trace murmured as they shared a quiet moment together. "I think he's impressed by what he's seen." "Really?" Hope asked, surprised by this development. "That's unexpected." "Not entirely," Trace replied. "He's a businessman with good instincts, and he raised a daughter with exceptional judgment. He's simply following your lead in his own way." The celebration continued into evening, with dancing under lantern light and toasts from friends old and new. As the sun set behind the distant mountains, casting golden light over the gathering, Hope found herself momentarily separated from Trace, watching him converse with Joseph's father near the edge of the square. "He's a good man, your husband," said a voice beside her. Hope turned to find her father, observing the scene with thoughtful eyes. "The best man I've ever known," Hope replied simply. Richard Mercer nodded, accepting this assessment from the daughter whose judgment he had once questioned. "I see that now," he acknowledged. "And I see why you belong here, though I was slow to understand it." Hope slipped her hand into her father's arm, leaning against him briefly in a gesture reminiscent of childhood. "Thank you for coming, Father. It means more than I can express." "Wild horses couldn't have kept us away," he assured her, patting her hand. "Though I must say, after experiencing the journey firsthand, I have even greater admiration for your courage in making it alone." "Not entirely alone," Hope corrected, her gaze finding Trace across the square. As if sensing her attention, he looked up, meeting her eyes with a smile that still made her heart quicken. "I had help when I needed it most." The evening concluded with a traditional sending off. Friends and students lining the path to the new house Trace had built in town, a comfortable 2-story home with a study for each of them, and room for future expansion. As they reached the threshold, Trace surprised Hope by lifting her into his arms to carry her across. "Welcome home, Mrs. Galloway," he murmured, setting her gently on her feet in the entryway. "Home," Hope echoed, looking around at the space they would share, the life they would build together. "It already feels right, doesn't it?" "It does," Trace agreed, drawing her into his arms. "From the moment I found you in that canyon rain, nothing has ever felt more right." Their kiss was different now, unhurried, intimate, no longer constrained by propriety or public setting. When they parted, Hope rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady heartbeat that had become her favorite sound. "You remember what you said to me that day?" she asked softly. "When my wagon broke and I thought all was lost," Trace smiled against her hair. "I believe I said something about reaching the end with me beside you." "You did," Hope confirmed, raising her face to his. "And here we are at the beginning rather than the end, still beside each other." "And we'll remain so," Trace promised, his blue eyes holding hers with unwavering certainty. "Through whatever storms may come, whatever canyons we must cross, always beside each other." In that moment, with the sounds of celebration still echoing faintly from the town square and the future stretching before them full of promise, Hope knew she had found far more than she had ever sought in coming west. She had found purpose in her classroom, community in Idaho City, and love with this remarkable man who had appeared when she needed him most. The broken wagon in the canyon rain had not been an ending but a beginning, the first step on a journey that would continue, with all its challenges and joys, with Trace beside her through whatever lay ahead.